Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Those of you who are watching this live, those of you who watch this on catch up, we're now 8 o'clock in the UK time, third presentation of the day in the International Marine Surveying Fest, second edition. Delighted to introduce you to Captain Yves Vand, Standard Club Director, Loss Prevention, who's based out in Singapore. I've had the pleasure to get to know Yves quite well actually in the last couple of years. He's spoken at conferences for us out in Singapore, and this is actually a reprise of a presentation he gave to our audience in Singapore earlier this year. So without further ado, Yves, over to you and your presentation, key components of the good safety management system.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning or good day to everyone listening in. Let me see if I can go through. Yes, this works. Okay. What I wanted to talk about this morning is really an overview of what we see from the club side when it comes to safety management systems. We all know what they should be, but what I want to stress in this presentation is what do we see as the reasons for claims when we do our analysis for the club's claims that we are getting, and what systems are in place to try and prevent these claims from happening. Now, I always like to start with some statistics and a case study. On an annual basis, from our side, we get about 2,000, 2,500 incidents giving rise to a claim against the club. That means that can be really small things, from a small little cargo claim. It can be up to a Maersk Honam type of mega claim. But that means if you look at the number of ships that we insure, which is about 6,000, 7,000, depending on the GRT that you look at, it's about one claim per 2 or 3 ships that we insure. So if we have a ship owner with, say, 10 ships on risk with us, that means half of his fleet or her fleet is likely to have a claim in the next year. So that's quite a high percentage actually. But even then, all of these claims that are happening on ships that are certified with an SMS, that have passed their ISM. They all have certified watchkeepers on board that comply with the latest STCW requirements. So what is it that makes ships that are compliant still have claims? A little bit at an overview of the type of navigational claims that we are getting. This is not all of our claims. This is purely the navigational side. And out of that, we see the vast majority are groundings and collisions. It's not often that we have a capsizing or a main engine failure or a structural failure in claims that we see. So the vast majority is groundings and collisions, which really is human element related. It's really the watchkeeper that is usually at fault for this type of navigational claims. This is another overview where we try to look at policy year. We try to understand how these different types of claims, be it a collision or a grounding, if there is a trend, if there is anything that we can predict. But a bit difficult from this graph. There's nothing really that we can say, except that they tend to happen on a yearly basis, and maybe a little bit more so in recent years. I have to say that when you look at navigational claims on a club's total perspective across all the type of claims that we get, they are quite a small percentage in number. But in value, they are really big. They tend to be the expensive ones. If you look at the personal injury or the illness claims, which is about 30% of the claims that we get, that's a lot in number, but a lot less in value. And similarly for the cargo claims, which is another 30% of our claims, that again, high in number, but not so much in value. These navigational claims are the expensive ones. Definitely, if you look at Costa Concordia, or there's many examples out there. Now we have seen, we've analyzed a lot of these claims that we have been having over the years. And what we do find in there is a lot of the groundings that we've had. When we analyze them, we see an over-reliance on actors. We see that people are not making proper use of the equipment that they have available to them. They tend to rely too much on the actors. They tend to not properly use the ARPA. They tend to forget about visual bearings. That seems to be prehistoric nowadays. And we see commercial pressure coming up in these examples. What I want to do is I want to go through one case study. This is for a container ship that left Singapore some time ago by now and was bound for Hong Kong. Now, leaving Singapore port and you want to go Hong Kong, you have to cross the westbound traffic lane in order to join the eastbound one and head out of eastbound into the South China Sea. Pilot was on board, master was on the bridge, second mate was there, rating was there, helmsman was there, blah, 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 all fine. Pilot is being dropped off. And before the pilot disembarks, he informed the master, please be advised that there was quite heavy traffic in the westbound lane. VTIS was involved here as well. Pilot was gone. Normally this kind of ship, it'll slow down to about 4 or 5 knots when dropping off the pilot. After the pilot disembarked, master went half ahead, and on a container ship, a half ahead leads up to about 17 knots. So we had quite a good increase of speed there. Then the master was looking at the radar and saw, I think there were about 3 ships coming from his port side, so that were in the westbound lane. The VTIS informed one ship on his port bow. So this was a tanker that was westbound doing about 10 knots. The VTIS called up the tanker and asked to be mindful of the container ship, which was on that tanker's starboard bow. The master on the container ship, meanwhile, he had to decide, was he going to slow down and wait for the tanker to pass, or was he going to keep going ahead and pass ahead of that tanker? Keep in mind, there were quite a couple of other ships following the tanker in the westbound lane. So the master decided, no, I can go fast enough. I'm going to go ahead of this tanker. There were some, they tried to have some communication over VHF with each other, but really, for those that have sailed here in Singapore Straits, it's quite impossible to try and make out anything over VHF because it's this non-stop communication going on, and you have to listen to quite a few different channels. So they really didn't have anything in particular. At the last moment, the tanker went to port, which, as everyone knows, is always the worst thing you can do when you have a ship coming from your starboard side. The master on the container ship tried to go hard to starboard, but it was too late, and the tanker T-boned the container ship. Lucky there were no fatalities, and the damage on the tanker was quite limited. But there was about 80 tons of fuel that spilled from the container ship into the strait, some containers that went floating, the cargo hold which got totally flooded on the container ship. So there was quite some cost involved. and I forgot how much the overall cost was. About $3 million. So not too expensive, but not insignificant amount of money. If we look at some other screens, this is an extract from the ECDIS where you can see the container ship coming out of the pilot boarding area. You can see the tanker on the westbound lane. I think I have some more. Oh, that's the tanker. And that's the container ship. Okay, this is more of a close-up where we have the container ship and the tanker again. And then there is a few more slides which show how they get closer and closer and in the end have a collision. And you can see on this last one where the tanker went to port. Now, when you analyze this kind of claims, what are the findings? What is it that you see? Of course, both ships are to blame. There's this rarely a case on collision where you have 100-0 liability. But lack of situational awareness, lack of perception of risk on both sides. Both of the ships had fully certified personnel on board, no problem, but they did not properly act on the situation. There was a focus, certainly on the container ship side, for the voyage to keep on. They had an ETA in Hong Kong, which they had to keep. And so there was commercial pressure on the container side, which is why the master decided to go ahead of the tanker. Now, one of the things that I see in this is the tanker, if we put ourselves in the tanker's shoes or ship, we have a watchkeeper there that sees a container ship on his starboard side. He tracks it on his ARPA. ARPA is telling you that the ship is doing 5 knots. How do you think that your CPA and your TCPA is going to be if you yourself are doing 10 and a ship on your starboard is doing 5? So likely on the ARPA of the tanker, the ship was going to pass astern. The container was going to pass astern of the tanker. When then the container ship was speeding up from 5 to 17 knots, the ARPA would not have immediately seen this. It would have taken quite some time for the ARPA to see the change in speed. And as a result of the change of speed, the change of CPA going from astern to ahead. So there was an error on over-reliance of the crew on the ARPA, because of if you would have taken a simple visual bearing of the container ship, you would have seen that instead of falling, that the bearing would have started moving ahead. So it's simple techniques that seem to be forgotten and that could easily have solved or prevented this collision. Similarly, I'm very much against the use of VHF in any kind of navigation. I don't see a reason to use a VHF. If you follow the call regs, then that's it. You just simply follow the call regs. There's no point in talking to each other about it. Even with AIS these days, you know which ship that you are talking to, but English is not a main language. So I don't see the point in using a VHF to talk to other ships. Now, this is not the only thing, of course. And when we look at other claims, we see similar. In general, what we find is that there is a reduction in navigational standards amongst watchkeepers these days. We feel that there is an over-reliance and misuse of technology on board of ships these days that is leading to unsafe situations or to people making the wrong decisions. We all know commercial pressure is quite often a key feature in incidents, and that kind of pressure will interfere with crew making unsafe decisions. So what do we need from a company's perspective, from a ship management's perspective? And this, for a surveyor, which I assume most of the people dialing into this will be surveyors, to look out for when doing surveys on board of ships. You need to find that resilient safety culture on board of ships. You need to be able to see that people are not just following the system, their procedures on board, but that they have that perception of finding risk. And that's what I want to talk a bit more about. We see technology being a disruptive element. So I spoke already about AIS in a way that, yes, AIS is good because you can talk to the correct ship, but it should not be used for anti-collision purposes. Also, when you're using an AIS overlay on your ACDIS, what we find is that people are using the AIS for anti-collision purposes and not use the radar information or the ARPA information as an anti-collision purpose. Azimuth rings, parallel indexing, that does not seem to happen much anymore. Same for visual bearings. We feel quite often that is lacking. And then there is the proper understanding of ACDIS. What we did a couple years ago, we went to one of our very high standard members and we did a series of interviews with them where we asked the crew, a number of, I think we had about 20 or 30 officers from junior rank up to master, who we asked a series of questions with regarding the use of ACDIS on board of those ships. And I can tell you, it was quite scary, the results that we received back from those interviews. There's a number of watchkeepers who do not know properly how to use an ACDIS, what the risks are when using it, how to distinguish certain symbols on an ACDIS. So that was quite scary, and as a result of this, we are trying to focus quite a lot more on doing navigational audits on board ships, but then preferably during a voyage, not alongside. One thing that I wanted to focus on as well is that we all know that SOLAS does not require a sextant to be carried anymore on board, but it seems that now the sextant has been replaced by a selfie stick as the newest piece of SOLAS equipment on board. And this brings another factor into the picture. When crew is able to use their mobile phones on the bridge, you get distracted from doing the navigation. And it's something that we advocate also quite seriously on, that one, there should not be Wi-Fi available on board of the bridge or in a control room or an engine control room. But some of our members go further and do not even allow the phone to be brought on the bridge, regardless of whether there is internet available, because of course you pass through the Singapore Straits, you are in mobile range and you can easily have your social media accessible to you even without Wi-Fi. And it only provides a distraction because you'll feel a little vibration in your pocket, and it's quite difficult to resist the urge to go and see what happens. And then you'll forget to do the navigation. So we see this as a reason for poor navigation as well. This is another example of an ACDIS grounding or an ACDIS assisted grounding, where the blue line is the track of the ship, and in the top right, I cannot point my fingers. If I point my fingers, nobody can see it. But you can see where the icon of the blue ship is, where it ran aground. So one of the main reasons here was that they had too much speed for the area that they were in. They overshot the first waypoint, made too much of a correction, and then overshot the second waypoint as well to go in between two atolls. But in addition to that, the settings on this axis are totally wrong. So this is an image that was taken immediately after the grounding. So these were the settings that were in use at the time. And you can see that the dark blue area, the setting of that safety contour was done wrongly. It was set at 30 meters, which is actually a default setting when an axis comes out of the box. That's what it defaults to. So it was never properly set. So people would not be able to properly navigate on this axis. So what are we trying to do here? By analyzing these claims, by seeing the problems that exist, what we want is, we want to have a system that allows us to reduce the risks that we are taking on board of ships. We want to be able to learn from other people their mistakes without making a mistake ourselves. We want to have a safety net in place that prevents a small mistake from becoming a major incident or a major casualty. The strange thing is that all of these safety objectives, we have a system for that. We've had a system for that since 1995, which is called the ISM. The ISM has all of these items in place. It has safety committee meetings, it has permits to work, it has near-miss reporting requirements where you can learn from near misses. It has root cause analysis available. So if this was in place since a long time and everybody has grown up with this system, why is it that we are still seeing failures? Why is it that ships are still having collisions? Now, when we do our surveys on board of ships, what we find with this safety system, and this comes back again to the point when you as surveyors are doing surveys on board of ships, what I hope all of you will agree with the things that I'm going to say, we find that safety committee meetings are a formality. Very often when we review the reports of safety committee meetings, they talk about a lot of things: quality of the food, the absence of shore leave, the extension of a contract on board, a lot of things that they talk about, except onboard safety. That's one thing. We very often find risk assessments that are just simply not understood. You can find a stack of 10 centimeters of risk assessments on board of a ship, which will have been prepared by the DPA and his colleagues in the office, and which on board of the ship people will take out when they need to do an enclosed space, for example. They'll take out the associated risk assessment, they'll sign on the dotted line, and they file. When you, however, ask people on board of ships to explain to you what is a risk assessment, can you explain this green, yellow, red kind of boxes? What does it mean to have mitigating factors in place to reduce your risk? You will find that the crew just simply cannot explain it, which is a real shame, because what's the point of them signing on the dotted line when they do not understand what it is that the risk assessment is telling them? Similarly, for the permits to work, very often they will get done after you finish the job, or they will not get done properly. Long time ago, when I did a survey on a ship, I asked the mate to prepare the ballast tanks for inspection. And he said, okay, fine. Then we continued with paperwork, and I think half an hour or an hour later, he came back to me. He says, "Oh, Mr. Surveyor, ballast tanks are ready for inspection." I said, "Okay, fine, thank you." and you show me your enclosed space permit that you made for this. So he had actually filled it in. It was signed by chief mate, it was signed by captain, and I went through it, and they put in 0 LEL, oxygen 100%. And I was like, hey, wait a second. What do you mean oxygen 100%? He said, yeah, oxygen was 100%. I said, okay, fine. Maybe I can learn something here on this ship. I said, can you please bring me your oxygen meter and show me how you measured that the oxygen was 100%. It took him about 20 minutes to find his oxygen meter that he had just reportedly used to check said oxygen. He eventually found where it was hidden. He then tried to switch it on and show me where the 100% came from, which obviously he was not able to do. So it's this kind of things that you find so often on board of ships, where then what's the point in making an enclosed space checklist if they don't even understand how to use an oxygen meter? Or another example, when I was on a bridge of a ship, not the same one, and I was looking through a pre-departure checklist for the vessel, and everything was filled in again. The radars were checked, gyro was checked, GMDSS was checked, bow thruster was ready, everything was done. Until then I looked, I said, wait a second, you don't have a bow thruster. But it was ready. So we all know that people are doing this. It's a tick box culture. And I imagine in a way we from the club are partially to blame for this. Because of course, when a claim does happen and we go to the owners or our lawyers or our investigators, contact the ship owners, what is the first thing that they are going to ask that ship owner? They'll be asking for all the documentation to prove that that ship owner did its due diligence to make the ship seaworthy, which of course includes that pre-departure checklist. So in a way, there is a lot of pressure on ships to make these documents, which is not, of course, not a reason to tick box it. But one of the things there, which is going to be one of my recommendations later on, is that we need to have a system that actually works and that does not require the crew to spend too much time in filling in paperwork for it. We often see ISM manuals on board of ships that are 1 meter thick, where you have a layer of 1 centimeter of dust on top because nobody ever reads it. And you have little, what do you call them? Sticky notes on the pages of the most frequently asked questions about overriding master authority and under keel clearance. So those pages in the manuals are marked. Other than that, nobody ever reads the manual, which is, again, defeats the purpose. One of our members, actually the same one that prohibits the use of or bringing a phone on board of the bridge, that same member did a total revamp of their procedures and reduced it to a much more manageable size that is actually easy to use and easy to understand for the crew. That's the kind of goal that we need to get to. Similarly, for the near-miss reporting, you don't find it on board of ships, or if you do find it, I'm slightly exaggerating here, of course. There's always good examples in the world, but, well, we tend to survey the bad ones. Near-miss reporting, once a week or once a month, the captain goes sit together with the chief mate and the chief engineer. They'll suck their thumb and they'll come up with 5 near misses. So they'll reach their quota for the month. again, it defeats the purpose. But the reason there is, why is it that they are doing that? Because they are spending the time to come up with 5 near misses. Very often what we see is that they just simply do not understand the reason why they have to do it. I have to admit, when I was a junior officer on board of ships and we had to do near miss reporting, ISM just came into place that time. We also had no clue. And I did the same thing. We just fantasized the number of near misses because that's what was required from us. It's only afterwards that I understood what the reason is why I had to do these near misses and how they are being used. So that's another message out there. And even as a surveyor, what we very often do from the club side, when we are on board of ships, we don't just give observations. We tell them why it is important and why it is wrong and how they can improve. What else can I say about this? I don't want to talk about work rest hours. That's fake anyway. Good. Let's see. Now, this is one item, the way that the ISM is being used. There are other reasons. People tend to forget that they are in a dangerous place. The longer you are on board of ships, the more you are used to the dangers around you, the more that you forget that they are dangerous. I often give the example of when I'm walking to the office here in Singapore, because I've been walking to that office for the last 10 years on a well, not daily basis because I travel a lot, but when I am here, my feet are on autopilot. I don't need to look where I go. I can automatically walk to the office. But meanwhile, I cross a couple of traffic lights. And sometimes I end up being at the lifts in our building here without realizing that I have reached the office. I totally forget my passage from the train station up to the door, which is a risk. In Singapore, people, well, it's not as bad as in some other places, but the taxi drivers love to burn through the red lights here. So if I would not be careful, when I do this walk every day, I would get hit by a taxi. It's just an explanation to say you forget that something is dangerous when you are very familiar with it. If I walk around in Jakarta or Mumbai or Tokyo, it doesn't matter where, any place that I am not familiar, I won't forget where I am and I'll be paying attention to what I am doing. But it's the same kind of street. It's the same kind of taxi driver that will run through red lights. So what other things are there? You become familiar with it, but then you have the underlying causes. You have the commercial pressure, which we first talked about. We have the hierarchy, which you can still find on a number of ships where it's very difficult to go up against a strongly willed master. There is cost-driven. You get less and less crew on board these days. You have to comply with more and more regulations. People are being promoted much faster these days, so they have a lot less experience in rank before they go up to the next rank, or they only start learning the next rank after the promotion. So all of these factors also come into play when people need to deal with navigation or making decisions in a short period of time. So if I try and summarize what we do need, we have ISM. ISM has been there for a long time, but it is not always effective. It is not always properly understood by the crew. My recommendations there is to really review these safety management systems make them effective, make them easy to understand, make them easy to comply. If your pre-departure checklist is a lot shorter, there's a balance there to be had. How much detail do you need to give your crew? If you have to give too much detail, then basically what it means is that your crew is not, does not have the necessary experience. A checklist is, after all, just a reminder of what the crew should already know how to do. Very often as well, what you need to see is a commitment from the top. Really that top-down approach. If your superintendent comes along when you are surveying a ship and the superintendent is walking around without a safety helmet or wearing his flip-flops instead of safety shoes, how does that pass on the message to the crew? Those are things that really need to come from above, and that commitment to safety needs to be there. And as well, what I said earlier, the ability to train, to mentor, to lead, when either you're doing a survey or if you are on the owner's side, when you go on board as an owner's representative, you make that clear distinction when you are going either to do an audit or you are going to train the people to explain things to them. I feel that is very important. Just in 1 minute, I want to talk about something within Standard Club that we have been doing for a long time. And we actually implemented this before ISM came into force. At the time, we called it minimum operating standards because we wanted all of the owners that we have on risk within the club to follow a minimum operating standard. So what we did at that time, and the model has evolved over time and grown, we now call it member risk reviews. We go to the member's office and we review their operational side. So we don't just review the ships by doing surveys, but we also review the office side. How are they dealing with the near misses? How are they doing the training of the crew? How are they explaining or putting the non-conformities into correct KPIs and analyzing it, and then changing the training as a result of these KPIs? So all of that and a lot more, we go and look at from the club side. We give our experience, our feedback to the ship owner, how they can then further improve the shoreside management. These are a few of the areas that we address as part of that member risk review. I'm not going to go into detail. And also, this is not an audit. Very often we get a question that people say, we are auditing their system. No, this is really just to try and understand their operation and provide feedback in where we feel that they can do better. And a few examples for the various areas of things that we are looking at when we do these reviews. Good. I think that's it, Mike, from my side.
Yves, fascinating stuff, and you paint a pretty gloomy picture, if I'm honest. But I mean, that is the reality of what we're faced with. I've noted down a couple of questions I would like to raise. I'll invite anyone who's online, should they wish to ask any questions of Yves, obviously, then ask away. But does ISM need to change? I mean, is it time to completely overhaul ISM, and is that frankly likely to happen, is the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, we see in the super yacht sector, and let's face it, I'm talking mega yachts, I mean, those are small ships in their own right. We see mini ISM. Now, mini ISM would seem to make a bit more sense insofar as it's a scaled down version. So if you can't get people to read a great big thick meter high, you know, book with a pile of dust on it, might mini ISM have a place?
I don't think there's anything substantially wrong with ISM. I think what is wrong is the implementation of the code and how people interpret it and how it is being explained to the crew. I feel that on too many ships, it is purely a compliance issue. They do it because they have to do it, not because they feel that there is use in doing so. So I don't really think that there is an issue with ISM. I think a lot more training needs to get done, a lot more mentoring and coaching needs to be done. And even though people keep saying there's not enough crew, I feel that we should wait longer before promotions are being done. On the yachts, I have to say I have less experience when it comes to yachts. I don't think a mini ISM would be. Maybe there's some aspects I can understand of the full code that are less applicable when it comes to yachts. But even then, the ISM could be applicable to yachts, and you just make only what is required for or applicable to a yacht.
So is it a case then of trying to punish vessel owners who don't use ISM? I mean, you could use this carrot and stick approach. So you reward those who do have good ISM hygiene on board, as it were, and you punish those who don't, or is that just not practical?
How would you punish them?
I don't know. Just throwing it out there as a thought. I mean, it's a challenge, and it comes back to what we were talking about with misdeclared cargoes again, in a way. If people are doing that kind of stuff, which is causing ultimately worst case scenario loss of human life, which does happen, I mean, people have to pay the price for that, surely somewhere down the line. Or is it industry that pays the price?
I think in a way it's the industry that does pay the price, because we are all mutuals and we share the cost of all these claims that are happening. In a way, an owner will get punished if they don't properly comply with ISM, because on one hand, either he's going to fail his ISM audits, or if he has a claim, he's going to get a higher premium to pay for it. So it is in their benefit to try and comply with the code in a proper way. Plus, when we do our surveys, we will give our recommendations as well to the owners, and they'll have to comply with those as well.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, the other point I just wanted to raise, it's more of an observation really than a direct question, but you touched rightly on social media and the onslaught of social media. I was reading an accident report, I forget which one it was, but in the last couple of weeks. And the prime cause of the accident was that the watchkeeper on the bridge was watching videos on YouTube. You might have read that report. And you just wonder how on earth you can, A, get your mind around that when you're doing such a valuable role, and how on earth you prevent that happening.
Yeah, I have another presentation on social media, which I can talk about. We are pushing quite a lot on this topic. I think a lot of the clubs are pushing on it. And really owners need to have proper policies in place for the use of social media. And one of them for me is really there should not be any internet available on the bridge or even just totally forbid bringing your phone on the bridge, because no matter what people are saying, all of us are human, and all of us will just simply say, oh, it's only going to take me a minute to quickly look at a message, and you're 5 minutes down the road.
Yeah, I mean, if you look in the motoring world, I mean, I had a guy drive past me the other day, and he was, texting on his phone whilst driving at 50, 60 miles an hour. And yeah. They just think, I mean, you're back to risk again, and all of that. I mean, the risk associated with performing that action, it's dangerous to yourself, but it's dangerous to the other road users around you.
And it's not just talking on the phone. It's not just texting on the phone. I feel even if you are using a hands-free device to call while driving, it's not safe. because your mind, even your hands are on the steering wheel, your mind is on the phone call and not on the road.
Yeah, no, valuable. Yves, thank you very much. I don't have any other questions for you on the chat, so people are too shy to come and talk to you, or you've answered all their questions on RSN. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Yves, and thank you very much for contributing today. Enjoy your leave, which I know you're heading off on, and hope to speak to you soon.
No problem.